What is up, you guys? Welcome to yet another edition of Controversial Thoughts with Carnivore MD. Every week, I'll do a couple of these videos just sharing interesting science and things that I've come across. I started doing them during coronavirus, and they're kind of a fun way to share research in an informal format, little mini podcasts, roundups for the week, all this kind of stuff. I'm sure most of you guys are pretty sick of hearing about coronavirus, but some interesting stuff that I came across, and then we'll probably stop talking about it all very soon. YouTube is increasingly enjoying censoring my videos, so we'll see if this one stays up there or not. Probably won't stay up for very long because I'm going to be talking about reasons that we should not be fearing coronavirus at this time. But let's jump into it. So, really cool article I found in The Guardian this week. Vitamin K in some cheeses could help fight COVID-19. Their scientists in the Netherlands explore a link between a deficiency and COVID-19 deaths. So this is quite interesting. At the beginning of this article, they say that patients who have died or been admitted to intensive care with COVID have been found to be deficient in a vitamin found in spinach, eggs, hard and blue cheeses, raising hopes that dietary change might be one part of the answer to combating the disease. Isn't that fascinating? Except what they're finding, as would not necessarily be surprising, is that it's not vitamin K1, it's vitamin K2. It's the menaquinones. I talk about all of this in my book, The Carnivore Code. You can pre-order the second edition now, thecarnivorecodebook.com, from wherever you want to get it. I talk about the huge difference between vitamin K1, which is phyloquinone found in plants, and vitamin K2. Specifically in the book, I talk about how vitamin K2 levels, the higher levels, are associated with a much lower incidence of coronary artery disease and aortic calcific aortic sclerosis, but not vitamin K1, meaning that those who ate the most vitamin K2 appear to be protected in population studies, but intake of vitamin K1 had no effect. They found the same thing in this study with vitamin K1 and K2 in cases of COVID-19. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? K2 is better absorbed by the body. Well, probably. It's also very hard for our body to make vitamin K2 from vitamin K1. And as we know, vitamin K2 is in much more than just cheese. It's also in meat, and it's in egg yolks, and it's in liver. It's in organ meats. So if you want to get vitamin K in the real biologically active form, get vitamin K2. Eat liver, eat animal foods. Don't think about getting it from spinach, because that's not where you're going to get the vitamin K that's been found to be biologically active. Another nuance with vitamin K discussions is that there is a vitamin K2 form, isoform, a menaquinone found in natto, fermented soybeans, but it's only one isoform of vitamin K2. Menaquinones exist as multiple isoforms, MK4 through MK11 or 13, and only MK7 is found in natto. So if you want to get a full range of menaquinones, MK4, MK7, MK11, MK2, MK6, you have to eat animal foods, right? In previous podcasts, I talk about so many different vitamins and minerals. We are just finding more and more where there are deficiencies connected with worse coronavirus outcomes. Imagine that. Selenium, zinc, magnesium, manganese, vitamin D. Nutrition is connected with COVID outcomes. Imagine that. Boom. Crazy stuff, you guys, okay? Crazy stuff. On to the next thing. So this is a paper that I have been highlighting multiple times, and I think this is perhaps one of the most important papers for everyone to be aware of as we are moving forward with our coronavirus response and as we are moving forward with our coronavirus sort of preparations or responses or really creating strategies for the future. This is the paper published in Cell, a very reputable journal, showing that people who have not been exposed to SARS-CoV-2, unexposed individuals, can have T cells that respond to SARS-CoV-2 because of some degree of molecular mimicry. As they say here, measuring immunity to SARS-CoV-2 is key for understanding COVID-19 and vaccine development. Epitope pools detect CD4 positive and CD8 positive T cells in 100% and 70% of convalescent COVID patients, meaning that there are T cells of these two lineages, CD4 and CD8, that have epitopes that respond to SARS-CoV-2 in 100% and 70% of patients who have COVID. But the T cell responses are not only focused on the spike, but also on M, N, and other open reading frames. If you don't know what these are, you can go back to the first podcast I did on coronavirus. But this is the key point. T cell reactivity to SARS-CoV-2 epitopes is also detected in non-exposed individuals. This could mean that people who have never seen SARS-CoV-2 could mount an immune response because of other viruses that they've been exposed to that look very similarly. And these people might not develop antibodies to SARS-CoV-2, which means that we don't have a great test for who has been exposed to SARS-CoV-2. We don't know how widely this virus has spread in the population. So all of this discussion, all of this argument around herd immunity and how many people have been exposed is now based on antibody testing, IgM and IgG. And if those tests are not going to detect people who have pre-existing reactivity from other viruses, we're just shooting in the dark, you guys. We're never going to know this. And I think, as I've said on previous videos, a couple of which got removed from YouTube, the fact that rates of death of coronavirus are declining across the board, with lockdowns ending and people moving around, suggests that this virus has spread much more widely than we think. And I do not believe there will be a major second wave with all of these protests. I think there probably will be a small bump in the fall, but I think that we have seen the worst of this virus for now. It will be around for a long time, but I do not believe there will be a massive second wave. And these figures that 5 to 10% or less of people have been exposed, I think are based on flawed thinking and flawed testing, because we cannot be sure that everyone who has been exposed to SARS-CoV-2 will develop an antibody. This is a critically important point that I cannot stress enough. I cannot stress this enough. Other stuff that I think is interesting: no evidence of secondary transmission of COVID-19 from children attending school in Ireland in 2020. This is kids going back to school, and wait, they're not spreading coronavirus, meaning that the kids going back to school, there's essentially no evidence of spreading of coronavirus from these kids. Oh, imagine that. Furthermore, the devastating ripple effects of the COVID-19 crisis. This talks about the many negative side effects of lockdown strategies implemented in many countries. They include psychological effects, economic effects, etc., etc. And look at this. Remember when everyone was worried about Lake of the Ozarks and all of the people partying there, and how there was going to be a huge transmission of coronavirus? No new COVID-19 cases from Lake of the Ozarks crowd, Missouri Health Director says, June 4th, 2020. What? Imagine that, you guys. Crowds of people gather at Coconuts Caribbean Beach and Bar. Right? No new cases of COVID-19. This virus has spread more widely than we think. Reports of resurgence are fear-mongering, in my opinion. They're fear-mongering, in my opinion. And furthermore, look at Georgia. Lockdowns have ended. I'm going to keep tweeting the Georgia COVID graph till the lockdowns end. They opened up 6 weeks ago, yet COVID deaths keep going down. This is indisputable evidence. Lockdowns are unnecessary overkill. You can see COVID-19 deaths over time. Here is May 14th. COVID-19 deaths continue to decline. They've been open for 6 weeks, you guys. This is really, really strong evidence that the lockdowns are not needed right now. At the beginning of this one, I talked about vitamin D as one of the nutrients that's critical. Found a few interesting things about vitamin D. I talk about this almost every week right now. Interesting paper here, COVID-19, more deaths, more lockdown, more suffering. Just a graph that shows the things I've been talking about before. That in the blue is the average age of the 20 groups of patients, and the red is the death rate. And you can see that as the vitamin D concentration increases in nanograms per ml, you see a very sharp drop-off in the death rate of people with COVID-19, beginning around 27, really crossing this 50% around 30. Once you get down here to 32, 34, 35, nanogram per ml, you can see it's dropped off precipitously. So isn't this super cool that hospitals in Barcelona are taking their patients into the sun? Why are we not doing this in the US? This is amazing to me. This is amazing. So where are we with all this? At the risk of being glib, I thought that this on Twitter summed it up pretty well. We did it, Patrick. We flattened the curve. While everything just burns around us: economic collapse, mass unemployment, substance abuse, small business, suicide, rights infringed, constitutional infringement, who knows? As I said in my previous video, I cannot but imagine that part of the unrest now is related to the fact that we've been locked up in our homes for 2 months. That's not to invalidate or suggest that people should not be allowed to protest or there are not things to protest right now. It's not to suggest that racial issues are not important. It's not to suggest that Black lives are not important, that white lives are not important, that Asian lives are not important, that all lives are not important. It's to suggest that when there is a powder keg of people who have been locked up in their homes and there is a sudden incidence of racial violence, people are likely to respond a little bit more intensely. And as I said in my last video, what is going on with these bricks ending up at these sites? If you didn't see that one, listen to the last Controversial Thoughts video. There certainly are trolls out there that are trying to divide us, you guys. And I think that now is not the time to be fighting amongst ourselves. We should be fighting amongst the common enemy, or toward the common enemy, which are really the racial injustice, the persistence of racism in our society, which is just tragically sad. Paper from David Sinclair, Why Does COVID-19 Disproportionately Affect Older People? In this paper, he talks about immune changes in older people, and I disagree with him a little bit. I don't think it has to do with age. I think it has to do with increasing insulin resistance. And as we know, as I've talked about in many of my videos in the past, immune system programming is intimately connected with insulin signaling. When we become insulin resistant, our immune system does not work. He says the aging immune system. I say no. It is the insulin resistant immune system that we need to be worried about here. And he talks about the aging innate immune system and the aging adaptive immune system. But as we know, I think this is all connected with insulin resistance regardless of age. Regardless of age. At the end of the paper, he offers some possible strategies, which include mTOR blocking agents like metformin or rapamycin, and those perhaps may be valuable, but I think that I would much rather do this in terms of the way that we live our life. And this gets back to living a radical life. This gets back to things I have talked about in my other books, which is environmental hormesis rather than molecular hormesis. It's in the Carnivore Code, you guys. I don't think we need to be using metformin to fight coronavirus. We can just be fasting, doing low carb occasionally, and having time-restricted feeding. But wait a minute, Paul. Didn't you just do a podcast on eating carbs? If your mind was blown by the fact that I ate carbohydrates with a continuous glucose monitor, I hope that you'll watch the whole podcast and not just the snippets that I'm posting on Instagram. What I am clearly not saying, if you watch the whole podcast, is that everyone needs to eat carbohydrates. What I am also clearly not saying is that carbohydrates are bad for all people, as I fear the dogma has become. I think there is too much fear around carbohydrates. Certainly the source of carbohydrates matters, but I continue to eat an entirely animal-based diet, and I add honey some days. You can make a strong argument that honey is an animal-based product. I don't like plants. I don't eat any plants. As you'll see if you listen to that whole podcast, I don't like the way fiber makes my gut feel at all, and I continue to absolutely feel that animal foods are the best foods on the planet. I think that our ancestors would have eaten honey from time to time. I also think they would have eaten occasional fruit from time to time, and that would have been the majority of their carbohydrates, and that would have allowed for some degree of metabolic flexibility. As I talk about in my book, The Carnivore Code, if you've read my book, you know my ideas. There is the possibility to create a spectrum of plant toxicity, with some plants being less toxic than others. We should not be so dogmatic. Results over dogma. We can't fear all these things. If you want to eat an entirely animal-based diet, that's fantastic. It's basically what I do. And I've found personally that adding honey, a no fiber containing carbohydrate, a few days a week really helps with electrolytes and other things. I've heard so often people will say, I can't sleep when I'm eating carnivore. Try and add some less toxic carbohydrates back. I get palpitations. Well, you're probably not managing your electrolytes properly, being zero carb or ketogenic. Add some low toxic carbohydrates back. It's not the end of the world, you guys. Keep an open mind. Listen to the whole CGM podcast if you want the information there. My friend Nina Teicholz wrote a great piece in the Wall Street Journal, a low-carb strategy for fighting the pandemic's toll, right? Fantastic idea. I think for those who are insulin resistant, a low-carb strategy can be very helpful, but it's not the only way. It's one way, but it's not the only way. We need to be very careful how we think about this and not become dogmatic. We also need to eliminate vegetable oils, which we know are a huge part of this problem too. I'm going to get Nina on the podcast very soon, and we will be talking all about this stuff. I thought this was a great article in the Medium, or at least an interesting headline. A plant-based poison that you eat every day. Oh, it's vegetable oil, you guys. It's vegetable oils. The combination of the overconsumption of processed carbohydrates and vegetable oils, that's what causes insulin resistance, not carbohydrates per se. We need to be very careful how we discuss this, and the details are important. The devil is in the details. As I wrap up here, I want to talk about, Jonathan Safran Foer wrote an opinion in the New York Times. The end of meat is here, you guys. The end of meat is here. If you care about the working poor, racial justice, and climate change, you have to stop eating animals. Except poor Jonathan isn't aware of regenerative agriculture and farms like Belcampo, White Oak Pastures, and Rome Ranch, which in fact completely destroy this argument that he's making here. Completely. I've reached out to Jonathan on Twitter. I reached out to Bari Weiss, the New York Times. I would love to debate Jonathan on this. This article is propaganda, and it is dangerous, and it is false. It is false. He begins by talking about how horrible it is that these pork processing plants were huge outbreak centers for coronavirus. Well, we know that anywhere people are cloistered, coronavirus could have spread. This is not anything, it's not anything special. What's really concerning to me is here he says, animal agriculture is now recognized as a leading cause of global warming. That is false. And when people say this, when vegetarians and vegans say this, when people parrot this, I cannot wait to debate them. They are basing this on a flawed methodology from a 2016 FAO report, and it doesn't jive with EPA reports that I talk about in my book. So what's going on? Why do EPA reports say that ruminant animals like cows contribute less than 2% to greenhouse gas emissions in the US, and FAO reports have numbers that are 5 to 6 times that amount? If you look at EPA reports, they're comparing tailpipe to tailpipe. They're looking at the amount of methane that comes out of a cow's mouth to the amount of carbon dioxide that comes out of a car's tailpipe. The FAO report is not doing that. This is where the data gets fudged. And how many people, including Jonathan Safran Foer, have read this data? How many people who are parroting the falsehood that cows contribute to climate change or cows are the major contributor to greenhouse gases have actually read the environmental research? Almost no one. They're parroting. The FAO report compares a life cycle analysis of the emissions from a cow to tailpipe emissions from a car. Those are not the same thing. And in fact, no one has ever done a life cycle analysis of emissions from the tailpipe of a car or from the CO2 that's produced from a car, meaning that how much carbon dioxide is produced to make the car? What about the carbon dioxide produced to make the road? What about the carbon dioxide produced to recycle the car? What about the carbon dioxide produced when you are getting maintenance done to your car, or to make the tires for your car that you replace, or to make the brake pads for your car? No one has done a life cycle analysis of transportation. They're comparing apples to oranges, but they're using a life cycle for the cow. It's not really fair. It's very misleading. And furthermore, as I've talked about on multiple podcasts, and as I talk about in my book, the carbon dioxide, or the carbon that comes out of a cow, is methane. And methane is part of the carbon cycle. It's recycled in our atmosphere. It's not new carbon. The carbon that comes out of your car is new carbon being added to our atmosphere because it's liberated from the ground, meaning that carbon atom in the carbon dioxide in the exhaust from your car was in the ground. The carbon atom in the methane from a cow burp was recycled, meaning it was not part, it was part of the atmosphere a number of years before the cow burped it. The cow burps it, it goes into the atmosphere, becomes carbon dioxide, which is fixed into a plant, becomes a carbohydrate that the cow eats. There is no new carbon going into the atmosphere in the carbon cycle. When you're burning emissions, you're putting new carbon, you're liberating new carbon into the environment. It's not even the same process. But the people who are worried about climate deny this. They don't understand this, they miss this. And furthermore, what they're also missing is that regenerative agriculture, farms like White Oak, Belcampo, Rome Ranch, when you increase the quality of the soil, you can sequester more carbon into the soil. They're carbon negative based on life cycle analyses. That is the way to keep the earth healthy and viable. You need animals on the soil to keep carbon in the soil so that you can grow plants on the soil so that plants will feed the animals. If animals go away from the land dies. Look at monocrop agriculture. That depletes the land of nutrients. Jonathan is missing so many of these points, and it makes me so sad, and I can't wait to disabuse him of these false notions. It really is it's pretty misleading, and it's pretty frustrating. George Henderson wrote a response as well. A case for red meat, which is a great little summary. I think in my book, The Carnivore Code, you will find a case for red meat in strong representation as well. The last thing, I'll close with this. This is an article from 2017 from Lustig and my friend Alcim Malhotra. The cholesterol and calorie hypotheses are both dead. It's time to focus on the real culprit, insulin resistance. On the podcast this week, coming out on Tuesday, is my friend Dr. Jack Wolfson. He's a cardiologist, and we talk about the question, again, cholesterol, friend or foe. We've all been told that it's horrible for us, but if you've read my book, you know there's a much different side of that narrative. So hope you guys are doing good this weekend. I'm going to the Texas coast. Yes, I said that right. The Texas coast to go surfing. Check out my book, thecarnivorecodebook.com. You can pre-order the second edition now. Hopefully these controversial thoughts are helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments. And check out the CGM episode. Watch it in its entirety if you are confused about why I eat carbohydrates and how to incorporate them, or if to incorporate them in your life. Stay radical, you guys.